the average woman uses over 168 chemicals on their body daily. You are using, conventional products from the supermarket. Some of those chemicals can be carcinogenic. But these have been linked to breast cancer, developmental issues, decreased fertility, obesity, and asthma. And these are found in
Welcome to Chief Life, the podcast that cuts the crap with science-backed insights on health, nutrition, and performance. Get expert advice, actionable tips, and everything you need to take control of your health and live your best life. Let's get started. Welcome to today's episode where we're focusing on environmental toxins. Nicky Skinner is a passionate wife, mother of two, and former pediatric emergency nurse who's now a holistic health coach. Nicky is dedicated to help families make natural swaps for everyday pharmaceuticals and educating them on the importance of lowering environmental toxins. Hi, Nicky, and thank you so much for coming onto our podcast. I absolutely love your Instagram, and that's how I found you. It's filled with good information, and this is what I want to share with our listeners.
So good. Thank you so much. Absolute honor to be here. I'm really excited to kind of dive into some of these areas with people.
Yeah, let's do it. So tell us to start with, when and why did you start Low-tox living?
So for me, I was a bit late to the party, to be honest. It really took becoming pregnant with my first daughter, and I suddenly I had my eyes opened. I don't even remember why it was, but I suddenly just realized I was growing this baby inside me, and everything that I was putting on my body, that I was, spraying in my ear, that I was, putting on my skin was actually going directly into my body. And I hadn't really, made the connection or really been in a space to care before then. And so that was kind of the trigger for me to really start diving into the research and looking at these things. So as you explained to people, I come from a traditional medical background, and so looking at most of my life through that lens, I'd never considered that this paracetamol that I was popping whenever I got a headache, or just the frequency with which I was relying on conventional medication actually has a lot of side effects that are not discussed. And so it really just led me down a massive rabbit hole into so many different areas. And I think, I'm about to talk in a minute about how dire our health is, but I was working as a nurse, particularly when I was working in adult emergency, and just seeing the level of chronic disease that was coming through those doors, it really made me realize that being the ambulance at the bottom of the hill is helpful, but it's not doing a lot for people, and I wanted to be able to work with people in a preventative way to help them not get to that space where they're needing my emergency help for, their heart attack or their stroke or all these kinds of things. Let's work with people on their diet, their lifestyle, all these things that can actually prevent chronic disease to begin with. So it was kind of a culmination of all of that. And the low-tox piece was, the realization that we can do a lot with our food and our water and, all those kind of beautiful lifestyle practices. But if we fail to address the environmental chemical burden, we're missing a massive piece in the puzzle for not just gut health and hormone health, but overall health and our mortality, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so for those who don't know much about Low-tox living, can you explain to the listeners why is it important now than any other time in history to reduce the toxic load in our environment?
Yeah. So I think I've pulled a whole lot of stats, and I think why this is helpful is I don't want to be alarmist to your audience, but I think it's important that they realize how bad things have gotten. So as a kind of globe, we're the unhealthiest we've ever been, basically. There's autoimmune diseases that are increasing in our children. Some studies actually show up to from 3 to 12% annually. These diseases are increasing. And 43% of children in Australia have at least one long-term condition, and about 20% have two. So these are things like asthma, like hay fever, allergies, even anxiety-related problems, developmental problems, all of that. There's actually been a 25.1% increase in autism in Australia over the last 10 years, over the last 9 years actually. And in New Zealand in 2000, in the year 2000, it was 1 in 150 children. And 18 years later, it's 1 in 44. So it's pretty intense. And that's just our kids, right? And obviously that's my passion piece because that's my background. But for our adults, right? So 35% of Australian adults have metabolic syndrome, and your audience will be familiar with what that is. Cancer's increasing. We kind of are hearing that in the headlines, and this is like especially in our young adults, unfortunately. Infertility, that's a massive one. In New Zealand, 1 in 4 women actually need IVF, which is massive. So it's increasing, and like I could reel off all of these statistics for you for hours. But obviously this is really multifactorial. I'm not saying all of this is just due to chemical burden. This is our stress. This is obviously our diet. This is the fact that we're not moving our bodies like we should be. But the environmental chemical burden on our bodies definitely plays a part in this. And so it's our water, it's our air quality, it's our personal care products, all of these things that we're about to chat about, they all just layer into this piece. And so that's kind of why I spend my time educating on this, because there's not that many people talking about it. So
Yeah, absolutely agree. But people also don't realize where are those chemicals actually, or those toxins. So there's so many environmental toxins in so many places. Can we sum up what or where can we find the most common toxins in our environment and what they do to our bodies?
Yeah. So there's actually thousands of herbicides and pesticides, from fragrance chemicals, microplastics, PFAS in underwear, yoga pants, fry pans, bandages, like it's everywhere. Then you've got things like fluoride in our water, our toothpaste, and a lot of them, what they're doing is they're causing hormone disruption. So they're either mimicking our hormones, or they're blocking certain receptor sites on our hormones in our bodies, or they are just disrupting their function. Some of these chemicals are carcinogens, so they're causing various cancers to start or grow in our bodies. Some of these chemicals lower IQ. They can cause disruption to our thyroid hormones. Some of them can actually alter our metabolism, so how our bodies actually function in terms of weight regulation, and a lot of them actually increase the risk of childhood obesity. So depending on what kind of category you're talking about, it has different effects on the body, but those are kind of just a really brief touch on some of them.
Yeah, okay, well, let's discuss them one by one, or at least the main ones. So let's start with the very basics, and let's talk about water. What is in our water?
Yeah.
Do we need water filters? Do we also need them in shower? Things like that.
Yeah. So filtering our water, for me, like this is a really important place to start, and it's a relatively easy place to start. So once people are aware what's in their water and what's actually in their tap water, they're going to want to filter it. So when you are looking at tap water under the microscope, you're going to see things like sediment, rust, bacteria, viruses, cysts, parasites. You're going to have a dose of chlorine in there. You're going to have a dose of fluoride. But they've also discovered things in our normal tap water, such as microplastics, PFAS, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, and heavy metals. So if we are not filtering our water before we ingest it, our bodies have to do that for us. So there are some chemicals in there that I've just talked about that are forever chemicals, and they're actually really difficult to actually for our bodies to process and actually leave our bodies. So, and a lot of those things, for example, microplastics, we're still just discovering what that's actually doing in our bodies. So I think it's a really easy, often quite an economical place for people to start is to filter your water. So I would recommend, like, if you don't have a water filter at all and you're brand new to this, starting with even just a jug filter. You can get some, relatively cheap jug filters, keeping that in the fridge and just starting there. From there, you might like to upgrade when, finances are there to maybe like a bench filter, something that actually remineralizes your water for you once it's filtered everything out. The ideal is to get a whole home filtration system, and that's what I have. It's definitely an investment, so do what you can to save up for that, and that just basically means that all of the water in your home when it comes in has been filtered, so you don't have to worry about getting an extra filter for your shower or your bath if you've got kiddos, which can be really, really helpful, particularly for skin issues. So if you have a child that's suffering from eczema, for example, even the tiny amounts of, say, like your chlorine in your water can be affecting skin. So if you've got a jug filter or a bench filter, it definitely pays to have a think about, where your kids or yourself, like if you suffer from skin conditions, those things, the hidden things in your water, because it's not just H2O.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I've got filters everywhere. Okay, let's talk about food now. That's really interesting because
Yeah.
everyone eats. What do we really need to eat organic? What about ultra
Yeah.
processed foods? What about
Yep.
seed oils? Tell us all about
Yep.
it.
Yeah. So I guess, food is a big one. And unfortunately, it's one of those things where, eating really, quality food can be seen as kind of elitist. And so I am very much, I love to talk to people about doing what they can, because a lot of people in New Zealand and in Australia, as I'm sure you're aware, are really struggling with the price of food. It has gone up astronomically, as you know, and so trying to help people to choose better foods on a budget is what I love to do. So really getting to know your farmers, right? If you have a local farmers market near you, the chances that you're going to be able to find spray-free, not necessarily organic certification, because that actually costs a lot of money for farmers to get that certification. But if you can find, spray-free produce, amazing. Definitely recommend it. It's just removing that extra burden on our bodies. If you cannot find, or if you cannot financially afford organic produce, because it is more expensive, it's crazy, but it is what it is, right? If you can't afford organic produce, wash your produce well. I definitely recommend, and this is easy. This is, filling a sink of water, adding, a quarter of a cup of baking soda. That's what the science is telling us is going to be removing that pesticide residue, and a couple of drops of like a lemon essential oil. Really, really helpful. Soak it for 20 minutes, put it on the bench, let it air dry before you transfer it into your fridge. And that is going to be really, really valuable for you. So there are certain, you will have heard, your audience will have heard about, the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. That's a kind of a good way to look at, what foods you might be able to financially prioritize buying, organic. So yeah, I prefer to encourage people to prioritize, colorful vegetables, eating fresh, food, and not stressing too much if not everything can be organic. So yeah, that's kind of my stance on that, reducing, that toxic load. Buying quality meats and dairy if you can as well. This, means that what you're going to be eating is less likely to be pumped full of antibiotics. So our chickens, our cattle, they're fed antibiotics in their feeds. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about is helping to try and educate people on something called antibiotic resistance, which is something that our globe is coming up against. And that added antibiotic resistant, so the antibiotics that you are getting through your food is just meaning that when you come to need an antibiotic for a bacterial infection that you might have in your leg or wherever you've got it in your body, maybe it's strep throat, then your body is going to react to that antibiotic appropriately and well when you need it, instead of not well because it's had a lot of exposure over time, basically. So that's something you can do. I think ultra processed foods is a bit of a no-brainer. We want to be avoiding that. We want to be limiting it. And looking at ways that we can learn basic skills for making things at home, if we can. I know that, in today's society, we're busy women. Most of my audience are mums with, kids at various different ages. And it is hard. And I'm not saying you need to avoid every single packaged food. That's completely unrealistic. But I love to encourage people, learn a few basic lunchbox fillers for the kids. And try and limit as much kind of packaged food as you can. There was an article, you may have seen it come out, I think it was in the New York Times recently, around, a dietitian on a bit of a pedestal trying to, say that ultra processed food is actually okay. And I just think there's so much evidence to the contrary that
100%.
we don't need to do it.
There's
It's just
tons of
ridiculous.
evidence. And also this is why we developed the Achieve range, because in an ideal world, we would teach everyone to cook from the scratch, from organic foods and stuff.
Yep.
But the whole Western world is used to snacking and convenience. It's not going to happen. Not everyone is going to cook, which is why we made our range that's free from artificial additives, free from emulsifiers, seed oils. So it's at least as close as possible to real food. It's made from organic meat. So we're trying, instead of teaching the whole planet to cook, give the busy moms and the busy people the option they can have actually healthy food that's packaged and convenient. But so this is a really good what you just said about the antibiotics and everything. I think a lot of people are not aware of that. But can you please also tell us why are herbicides and pesticides so bad for us? Because when I say to my clients they're wasting, I'm too hippie and I'm too out there. But can you please sum it up? Why are herbicides and pesticides bad for us? What they do to our bodies?
Yeah. So, there's quite a lot of different chemicals out there that are being used. One that your audience will be familiar with is called glyphosate. And this is otherwise known as Roundup. And unfortunately, we still use it. Our councils in New Zealand, I'm not sure about Australia, but we're still spraying it in children's playgrounds, and it absolutely breaks my heart because glyphosate, there are links to most of the studies that have been done are on people that are spraying it, but it makes sense that if glyphosate is in our food, which we are eating multiple times a day, this is repeated exposure over long periods of time. So it's not just one, exposure to too much glyphosate. This is low level exposure over time, and it's a cumulative dose of this. So things like, cancer, but also altering DNA. There's quite a few different things. And I think it's one of those things where, taking, 10 minutes to wash your fresh produce and doing what you can to prioritize organic food doesn't have to break the bank, particularly if I am part of a food co-op for a company called Ceres Organics. And that just means I've got a group of girlfriends who I go in with, and we all order, organic tinned beans and organic rice and organic oats. Oats are a very heavily sprayed crop. And we all go in, and it's a $500 minimum purchase every month, and everyone goes in and we do a big bulk order, and that makes prioritizing that way less expensive for our families. So there's definitely things that you can do, and I would think your community Facebook page would have a co-op in your wherever you are in Australia or New Zealand. So find those people that are wanting to do better and just join in. It might be organic in organic egg co-op or whatever it is where you're based. Find those people, do a little search on Facebook, and there's groups of people that are trying to do it and make it more economical for families. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good tip. I also read this study, it was earlier this year. They tested fast food and found herbicide and pesticide in all the foods from all the fast food chains. It was in the US, and that article also said that the accumulation of the herbicide and pesticide in our tissues is neurotoxic. It's linked to autism and all those things. So yeah,
You're
people
not
don't
even
realize
surprised.
that. They think that because the government uses the herbicide and pesticide, it must be safe, but it's actually
Yeah,
not.
yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
I'm glad that
yeah,
you agree. Okay,
yeah.
let's talk about really big topic, plastics. So people
Mm,
know they should avoid plastics, but they
yeah,
don't even realize where everywhere the plastics
yep,
are, and they definitely don't know how to avoid them. Like I still see
yeah.
people heating up their plastic food in a microwave here in
Oh,
our office building and things like
no.
that.
Yeah. So this is a really big one. And this is, we're going to talk at the end about, the three big pillars that I want people to focus on. This is one of them. Because I think it's the reason it's such a kind of a big deal is because kind of a two-pronged approach. So a lot of plastics can contain chemicals that are not good for us, like BPA, particularly the plastic that we're getting from like takeaway containers, and but even our BPA-free plastics still are going to be leaching what we call microplastics, so tiny, tiny, microscopic bits of plastic. Now, we have found microplastics in blood of humans, in urine, in the placentas of mothers, in breast milk, and most recently, they've actually found it in male testes. Okay, so we know it's in our bodies, and there was actually a research paper done earlier this year where it estimated that we are consuming up to 1 credit card worth of plastic a day, which is massive. And I don't know how accurate that study was. I think it's been a little bit debunked now, but it was still kind of a really good visualization for people and to get a real ballpark of like how serious this is. And I think the biggest thing is that we don't really know what these microplastics are doing. Like we know that it's terrible for the environment and it's really harmful for fish and aquatic life, but we are only really starting to do the research and figure out what the side effects of these things are. So it's one of those things where it's better to care about it now instead of in 20 years when all of these things are coming out about actually what's going on in our bodies. So my advice around plastic is to swap things out slowly. Well, actually, this goes for everything that we're going to talk about today, is do it slowly, bit by bit. You don't have to go and throw everything out and completely replace everything, but just slowly, each trip to the supermarket, maybe grab a glass container from the supermarket each trip to slowly build up your collection. One of the big things you can do is get rid of bottled water. Please stop buying pump bottles and taking those to the gym, giving those to your kids to take to school. Easy swap to make is ditch any kind of plastic drink bottles, particularly because those ones in summer and especially can sit out in the sun, and we know that when you heat plastic, it's going to be releasing those chemicals faster. We want to swap to stainless steel or glass. Now, obviously, glass is not practical for children, so stick to your stainless steel for your kiddos. Yes, yes. Yeah, stainless steel. So thinking about other things, take away coffee cups. This is a big one. And a lot of people are not connecting the dot that when they're holding like a paper coffee cup, it's actually lined with plastic, and the actual plastic top as well. There's some pretty alarming research about how many microplastics you're ingesting just from one coffee. So remember your stainless steel or your glass takeaway coffee cups. Bring those to the office. Have a couple there that you can go through. Storage. So food storage. I want to get you guys to swap to plastic or stainless steel storage. I prefer glass. A lot of people will ask me, oh, what about the plastic lid? I'm not as concerned about people with the plastic lids. Sometimes you can get plastic or even silicone, because most of the time when you're putting your food in that, the actual lid's not actually touching the food. So you're never going to be able to be perfect. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? So definitely your glass storage containers are huge. What else? Ziploc bags is another one, and Glad wrap. So swapping those out, having some beeswax wraps I really love at home for wrapping, like cheese or things like that. But you can also get silicone snap-lock bags, reusable ones, that you can wash and reuse. So great for the environment, but a lot better than your single-use things like that. Plastic lunch boxes, swap those out for stainless steel. What else? Even cooking utensils. People don't often think about, that plastic spatula that you're using in the kitchen. So swap those out. I love wood, unvarnished wood, or stainless steel is great. And the one thing I will say is, if you are still using plastic, please don't microwave it. So that's, you've already alluded to people in your office doing that, because we know from the research that when we heat plastic, that the leaching increases. So even if you're using plastic, if maybe you're going to continue using plastic to freeze in your freezer, that's probably, the lowest risk place that you can be using it on a daily basis. Yeah, so there's some ideas.
What about the plastic in tea bags? I think most people don't realize that a lot of tea brands have plastic in their tea bags, and there's some plastic-free tea bags, but what is your stance on that?
Yeah, definitely. When you're looking for tea bags to use, if you're a bag, ultimately, I love loose leaf tea, so that's your gold standard. But if you're like, look, I'm not there yet, and you want to just buy a safe tea bag, definitely be looking on the box. So a lot of them now are knowing that this is an issue, and they will advertise plastic free. So just be looking for that certification on tea boxes, because there's a lot of great brands, even at whatever mainstream supermarkets, that you can find that are plastic free.
There's this brand called Pack Up, UKKA, in Australia, and they're in every supermarket, and they're plastic free.
Exactly. Yeah, so good.
Great. Okay, next topic that people actually don't realize, that there are lots of endocrine disrupting chemicals and toxins in our clothes and underwear.
Yeah. So this is, yes, you're right, something that people don't often talk about, and it is important to know about. So I think because we wear clothes, and I'm going to get to this bit when I'm talking about laundry powder in a minute, but we're wearing clothes, obviously, all day, hopefully, and potentially at nighttime as well. Not my husband, but pajamas, particularly our kiddos. Polyester is a really common thing that you're going to find in a lot of clothes these days, and it's a synthetic fabric. It's actually made from petroleum-based chemicals. It doesn't breathe well compared to kind of natural fibers, but more importantly, it's the way that these fibers are treated. Okay, so it's the kind of toxic chemicals that they are often treated with. One of them is formaldehyde. Now, this is used to make clothing wrinkle-free, and to actually help dyes stick to the fabric. So formaldehyde exposure has been linked to certain cancers, particularly leukemia. So that's one thing that you want to be, thinking about. Another thing is PFAS, which again we're going to talk about in a minute. And this is often found in raincoats, but more recently in yoga pants and yoga bras, period underwear even. So one thing that you can do to avoid any kind of chemicals in your clothes. And the other thing is, people are like, oh, I'll just wash these chemicals out. Some of these chemicals are really persistent, and research has shown that we have to wash it about 50 times before we're actually really getting rid of those chemicals that have been sprayed on them. So just keep that in mind. Trying to buy organic is a great way to get around this. If you can't do organic, I like to help people to choose natural fibers. So things like cotton, linen, wool and merino are great. Hemp rayon. There's something called Model, which you'll see mainly in underwear, and another one is lyocell. Now, all of those are plant-based, so they're more sustainable, more ethical than these synthetic fibers that are basically made from plastic. So, great ways to avoid toxic exposure. Choosing organic, so it's not sprayed with chemicals. And this also goes with our bedding. So that's another thing that we need to kind of think about, because our sheets are often sprayed with flame retardants, and so are our pajamas, lots of kids' pajamas. But another certification that you can look for on clothes, and these are not necessarily just organic clothes, but other clothes brands, is something called Ecotex 100, and it's spelled OEKOTEX 100. Now, what that is it's a label for textiles treated for harmful chemicals. So it kind of sets the benchmark with textile safety. So right from the yarn right through to the finished product, and every item that has this certification has passed lots and lots of 100 different safety tests for the presence of these harmful chemicals. So that's another really cool certification that you can look for that can guide your purchases if you're trying to low-tox your wardrobe.
Yeah, that's great. I also want to point out that especially for men, exercising and sweating in a plastic underwear lowers their testosterone. So it is really important, because I always want to point out the effects of those things, because sometimes, I don't know if you find the same, when I say to people to avoid all these chemicals and stuff, they just think I'm crazy and it can't be that bad. But I actually want to point out, yes, it is that bad.
I think that's the kind of reason that I love citing research. If your followers want to come and check out my Instagram page, they'll find that when I talk about these things, I do post the research, because I think it's important, because otherwise people just accuse you of, fear mongering, which we don't want to do. We've got enough stress in our lives. We don't need, more people just telling us and trying to scare us into different things. So we want to be on top of actually what is the evidence behind this, so that we know this is a big deal and we should be, putting some effort into understanding it.
100%. That's why I love your Instagram, because it's all very educated, science-based. There's no crazy stuff. It's all just proper evidence-based advice. I love that. Okay, so next topic for your evidence-based advice, which is a huge one, especially for girls or women. Hair care, skin care, and body care. How do we know which one is good one and what's in the bad one?
Yeah, so true. So this is the big deal, and I'm pretty sure your listeners will have heard this kind of cliche, the average woman uses over 168 chemicals on their body daily, which sounds like a lot. Obviously, not all of those are going to be hazardous chemicals, but we do need to be careful, because some of those, if you are using, conventional products from the supermarket, from, Mecca, Sephora, all of those places, some of those chemicals can be carcinogenic. And there's actually some really interesting data showing that there is a link between something called phthalates, which are an endocrine disruptor, and these are found in fragrance, which we're going to talk more about. But these have been linked to breast cancer, developmental issues, decreased fertility, obesity, and asthma. There's actually it was about a year and a half ago now, a really interesting new study came out, and it showed that if the reduction of daily use parabens is another big one, parabens and phthalates, if you reduce those, you actually reverse the accumulation of cancer-associated phenotypes within healthy breast tissue of women. So essentially, your breast cancer risk actually physically decreases when you remove these chemicals, which we haven't really had any evidence like that before then. So that it was a really big deal. So we definitely want to be swapping out our skincare, our makeup, our deodorant, shampoo, sunscreens, all of these things that we're putting on our body. But again, I just want to emphasize, do it slowly. When you run out of something, try and choose better, right? If you don't know what to swap to, come and hang over at my on my page, because this is a lot of what I'm educating on. I'm giving you, posts where I've done the research, I've looked at these, I've rated them, avoid, better, best. And it can be really helpful when you don't know how to read ingredient labels, to have someone do a little bit of the legwork for you in those early days until you feel like you have the ability to recognize these ingredients that we want to be avoiding. Another thing I would recommend is downloading a good app to use on your phone to be able to scan things at the supermarket. So when you're in that supermarket aisle, and you're trying to choose a deodorant or even a lip balm or whatever it is, you can actually pull something up and you can scan it. There's an app that I absolutely adore that I used a lot when I was learning this kind of stuff. It's called Switch Natural, and I can give you a link for that in the show notes if you'd like. Yeah, it's a brilliant tool. And why I prefer this one over a lot of other scanning apps that are available is because what happens is when you scan that, it's going to bring up the lists of potential concern. But what you're going to do is you're going to click on that particular ingredient, and it's actually going to bring up the research behind why that's a concern. So you as the consumer can actually read that and be informed. So it's not just like avoid this, but you have no clue why. It's like actually, then you can actually read the data and be like, actually, I'm not too fussed about that. I'm actually okay with that product. So you can actually decide what's okay for your family, because different people are going to have different priorities, right? So, Switch Natural. I really like it, and I'll give you the link to share because it's I think it's around 30 New Zealand dollars, but once you've got it, and it's the most brilliant investment in terms of your mental health, because you no longer have to be like, what is that? Because I think the thing with label reading is that even though something might sound scary, it's not necessarily a bad ingredient. So even though it's a really long, complicated name, it could just be a simple salt. So it is. Yeah, it's really important not to get too overwhelmed. And I have found for people learning this stuff, it's a really great place to start. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I find those things confusing myself. So I found this deodorant, they said on a label it's aluminum free. So I'm like, yeah, that's amazing. And then I scanned in with the app called Yuka. I don't know if you know that
Oh,
one.
yep.
Yeah, I scanned it with Yuka and it came up with all these other like thyroid disrupting chemicals and
Yeah.
stuff. And I'm like, well, this is really misleading. And even for
Yeah.
me, I was like
Yep.
about to buy it and then I'm okay, maybe not. So yeah, it's
And I
definitely
think
good.
that's a really good example of something called greenwashing, which your audience are going to experience when they move into this space. Anything that a product is free of, you betcha they're going to advertise that. You'll see a lot of shampoos paraben free, but that's basically all they've left out. There's a lot of other stuff in there. So please, greenwashing is prolific in the personal care industry and in the cleaning industry. So you're going to see a lot of products that are earthy brown and green tones. They might have, little recyclable labels and things like that, or a lot of kind of greenery, lots of plants on their labels. And this is all to get you to feel like, oh, they're doing good for the environment, that must be good for me as well. And it's all greenwashing. So definitely turn that product over and read that ingredient list. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. It's the same in the food industry. That's why we say
Yes.
to everyone, become the pack flipper. And instead of looking at the front
Yep.
of the package, look at the back because that's where the truth
So good.
sits. Yeah, well, okay. So we already touched on a perfume. So let's continue there because perfumes, it's like a indulgence and, weak
Correct.
spot for many women and men.
It is.
So
Yep.
why shouldn't we use perfumes and what can we use instead?
Yeah. So perfumes, big one. Now, this is something that I love women to replace, and if they're wearing it daily. If you have a favorite fragrance that you absolutely can't do without, you don't want to bin it, wear it on a monthly date night with your husband or your partner. That's, if you want to do that, then that can be part of your 20% in your 80/20 lifestyle, But if you're wearing something daily, I would definitely encourage you to switch it out. Synthetic perfumes can, and fragrance in general, can be a combination of over like 300 chemical ingredients. And the thing with perfumes is that they don't have to disclose the ingredients that they're using, because it is under trade secrets. And so they most likely contain phthalates, which we've talked about, which are a known endocrine disruptor. So when you are looking at, replacing these kinds of things, which could be disrupting your hormones, there are some safer brands doing some really great things. One beautiful Australian brand that you may be aware of, I'm not sure, they're called OneSeed. Beautiful, as I said, Australian brand. They actually make some really safe perfumes. And I have a code for your listeners to get 20% off if you'd like me to share that as well. But I also love using essential oils. So OneSeed I would go for if you really do love the aroma of a certain, fragrance that you've used in the past, because on their website you can, look down of things that it might smell similar to. So they're a great one. But I love essential oils. I layer things like, jasmine, rose, magnolia, blue lotus, and I basically customize my own scent every day. And why I love that is that it's completely safe. So it's basically pure plants, zero synthetics. And so that's what I love to do. But, there's really an option for anyone. And I think it's one of those things where companies are starting to catch on to this, and more people are starting to produce, safe fragrance, because, synthetic fragrance has a lot of issues for a lot of people. And something that your listeners will notice is when they remove that, you will notice that your body's sensitivity actually increases. So that for a lot of the people that follow my account now, when they even are at the top of, say, like the cleaning product aisle or the personal care aisle, they can't even walk down it. Otherwise they get, a stuffy nose or an instant headache, because our body actually down regulates the enzymes that are associated with processing these things, because we've removed it. And it's almost like your body's doing a reset. And this is how it should be. But we are so desensitized to the amount of stimulus, the fragrance that we are experiencing. So we really do want a factory reset on our bodies and get back to basics and start using real plants.
Yeah, agreed. There's a reason why you can't have perfume on when you go to surgery in a hospital, or IVF or anything.
IVF,
right?
embryos, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a big one. And then since we're already talking about the personal products, the last one in a queue, a toothpaste. Can we use conventional toothpaste, or are there any other better options?
Yeah. So this is a big one. I think, one of the things that people instantly think about around toothpaste is the fluoride question. And there's actually, some other ingredients in toothpaste that we want to be avoiding, but I think fluoride's a really great place to start. So if you are still using, your Colgate or your McLean, fluoride-based toothpastes, it's definitely something to swap out. So we now have government agencies finally acknowledging some data that we've had actually since 2012, showing fluoride and a link to lowered IQ in children. So that's pretty huge. But fluoride can also mess with our thyroid glands, particularly as women. It can also, if it's used by pregnant mothers, there's actually some research showing an association with attention and behavior issues in children by the age of about 3. So there's definitely significant reasons to avoid it. And obviously we want to be filtering our water, so that's how we're going to get rid of it here. But toothpaste is another area. Now, when they put fluoride into a toothpaste, the reason they're doing that is to harden the enamel on our teeth and prevent cavities, right? So when we are ditching the fluoride, we want to add something back in that's going to replace it, that's going to be doing that enamel hardening, that whitening, the cavity remineralization. And something that I advocate for is called hydroxyapatite. And it's what we call biomimetic. So it's mimicking the biology of our teeth. Our teeth are made up of 97% of the enamel is made of hydroxyapatite and 70% of the dentine of our teeth. So when we get a cavity, we're not missing fluoride from our bodies. Like, we don't have fluoride in our bodies, and we shouldn't have it in our bodies. What we're missing is hydroxyapatite. So why would we not put back in what our body's actually missing when we're getting these cavities, right? So that's something that I would be looking for in a toothpaste when you're ditching the fluoride. So that's a really good place to start. Yep.
Great. Okay, so that's all our personal care. Still one more that's kind of personal care as well, our cleaning and washing products. I mean, it's not personal, but we use it with our
Yeah.
hands. And I
Yep.
think that's a big one in regard to endocrine disruptors.
Big, big, big. And I think it's a really great place for people to start. Like, because when people are thinking about chemicals, they do go immediately to what's under the kitchen cabinets, right? So I think one of the things when you're thinking about cleaning products is our laundry, and I kind of alluded to this a couple of questions back, because we are spending all day in our clothes, all night in our bed sheets, and if we're using the synthetic fragrance, which we now know we want to avoid, but other harsh chemicals in our laundry powder, we are exposed to that for a long time. Okay, so my advice would be to swap to an unscented laundry powder, and then you can add some beautiful essential oils to that if you really want that beautiful fragrance in your laundry. Or if you've got a dryer at home, you can grab some woolen dryer balls and actually pop some essential oils on the dryer balls in that cycle, in the last 15 minutes of your spin cycle, and your towels will come out smelling gorgeous. And that there's no synthetic, fragrance in there that could be causing, skin problems with your kiddos. It's a big one for people that come to me with eczema in their little kids. That's a big part that we swap out laundry powders is a big area to look at. So I guess, finding a clean brand at the supermarket, your app that you're going to invest in is going to help you with that, because as we've already talked about, greenwashing is prolific in our cleaning products. And one thing that really, really frustrates me is that cleaning products are not required to show their ingredient lists. I don't know if you've noticed this or not. When you
No.
go down the cleaning aisle, a lot of, like, say you pick up like a Mr. Muscle or a Jif or a spray and wipe, all of these kind of, you'll find lots of warnings about do not ingest, this is toxic, but you will not find an ingredient list. You actually have to go online to find the ingredient list. I don't know who made that law, but it's absolutely bonkers to me. So definitely, some of the cleaner brands will show their ingredient list, which is great because you can scan them and decide if that's going to meet your requirements. So definitely do that. And again, like, if you're really, really new to this, come into my page and find the posts that I've already done the research for you, because it will lower that anxiety and that stress the overwhelm that you may be feeling about all of these things that we're talking about today. I will say, doing it yourself, doing some DIY cleaning, much more economical. It actually takes, seconds, and it's really easy. And this is a really great way to lower that toxic load in your home. You can make a surface spray in your home with some liquid Castile soap, and some antimicrobial essential oils and some water, and it will cost you, I don't know, 50 cents instead of $6 for a spray bottle. You can add some white vinegar if you want to in there, but there's really so much you can do if you're really wanting to go back to basics and save a whole lot of money, and do things really without the chemicals. But for some people, that's not where they're at. They might be busy parents, and they don't actually have any mental capacity to figure that out. So yeah, grab your app and just choose. And the thing is, like, again, with this kind of stuff, you're replacing as you run out, right? So use what you have and just choose better next time.
Amazing. Well, next domestic thing, again, like everything is in the home, right? So cookware, you already mentioned that we should replace our kitchen utensils for a stainless steel or wooden one. But how about our cookware, like pots and
Yes.
pans and things like that?
Yeah. So I talk about this a fair amount.
The main thing when you're thinking about what you're doing your cooking on is to avoid something called PFAS. Now it's a big long word, and it stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl alkyl substances. So PFAS they're famously the chemicals that are used to make non-stick cookware. Non-stick, basically. So conventional non-stick cookware is made with a PFAS called PTFE, or polytetrafluoroethylene. The other name for that is Teflon, which I think your audience will be familiar with. So PFAS, why are these even a problem, right? So these are long-lasting chemicals. They're what we call forever chemicals. So the components, once they're in our bodies, they take a very, very long time to actually break down. And worldwide, they are prolific, and they are in our environment, and many have been found in the blood of people. So, like, how is it actually affecting our health? So, it affects reproductive issues, so decreased fertility, increased blood pressure in pregnant women. There are developmental effects, and delays in children, including low birth weight of babies. It can actually accelerate puberty in our little girls, which is concerning, and can cause behavioral problems. There is an increased risk of cancers, including prostate, kidney, and testicular cancers. And it also reduces our body's ability for our immune system to fight, which I think is a really important one. What else? It can actually reduce vaccine responses, which is interesting. And it basically interferes with our body's natural hormone production. And they can actually increase the risk of obesity. So, like, all of these effects, like, are so, I guess, far-reaching. Like, there's no one part that is not, compromised. So my advice around here is to skip the non-stick surfaces, right? So we want to swap out the safer surfaces that I advocate for are cast iron and stainless steel. So those are your two. Now, a lot of people come to me and say, hey, look, like, I am really struggling. I've bought a cast iron pan. I cannot get it to be non-stick. So really important when you've got your non-stick in your home to season it correctly. Honestly, just jump on your phone, jump onto Google. How do I season my cast iron pan? There's so many YouTube videos. Like, the information is really there, guys. But definitely season your cast iron well, and it will be non-stick. And the trick with stainless steel to get it to be non-stick is about heating it first and making sure that it's hot before you put your food or your pancakes or whatever you're cooking in your pan into the pan. So heat and then use, and you'll find that that's quite non-stick as well. So those are my two main preferences. A lot of companies have started to make ceramic coatings. Which unfortunately I have a problem with as well. They're better, definitely better than non-stick. The problem with ceramics, there's quite a few problems, but one of the big problems is that they scratch very easily. And the majority of ceramic coated fry pans have an aluminium core, and that's just for heat retention. But we don't want to be ingesting aluminium, so when it gets scratched, it can actually leach out into our food, and that's another whole area of why you don't want to avoid that. But I guess my kind of thing around that is ceramic pans might last you 2 to 3 years before they'll be too scratched to even use. Whereas if you grab a good cast iron, you're going to be handing that down to your children. So that's a one-off purchase. It might cost a little bit more than, replacing your non-stick every 3 to 4 years, but like that is going to be one and done. That's your lifetime investment. So in my opinion, that's a really good one to mitigate those risks.
100%. That's a great tip. So, away from the home, and I would like to touch a little bit on medication. This is a very sensitive topic because certain people need to take certain medications, and I get it. But I just want to quickly touch on any unnecessary medication that people take, and what does it do, and how can we not do it?
So good, so good. I love that you've specified that, because absolutely agree. I never ever demonize medication, because obviously coming from a conventional medical background, if you're in the emergency department, it's literally saving your life. So we don't want to say that medication is bad. It's not. It's the overuse of unnecessary medication that we want to mitigate. So let's chat about that. So I don't know if you know this or not, but 65% of people in Australia are on one or more medications a day. And I don't know about you, but like for me, that's quite a lot. You know,
It's
we have so many
crazy.
stressed people. It's so crazy. So many of those medications are purely going to be managing symptoms. So they're symptom relief, right? They're not actually treating the underlying pathology of what's going on for that person. So I love to advocate for people to look at the root cause of that disease or that dis-ease that's going on in their body. So not just taking a pill to mask the symptom and moving on with our life. But yeah, as I said, there's absolutely a time and a place for medication. It's about finding that balance, using that medication without fear when it's warranted, but also having something natural to reach for as your first line. Because 9 times out of 10, you know, that oil or that herb or that homeopathic will work brilliantly for you. So here's an example. For a lot of people that I talk to are parents, and they often are in the habit of giving paracetamol at the first sign of a fever in their little one. Now, a lot of times parents don't recognize that the fever is the body's actual natural immune response to a virus or a bacteria. And that is by running in there and giving that paracetamol really early, what you're doing is you're suppressing that necessary process that our bodies need to do. And you're actually preventing the body from heating up enough to kill that virus. So what I love to teach parents is to treat the child's symptoms, not just how hot they are, right? So you've got to look at the child. Are they miserable? Are they, won't sleep, absolutely inconsolable? Maybe that paracetamol is right choice. But are they just a little bit hot and they're sitting on the couch quietly, watching Paw Patrol? Like, don't rush on in there with that medication, right? So remembering that there is also some evidence that shows that long-term paracetamol use can actually deplete something in our body called glutathione. And that's one of our master antioxidants. And we need our glutathione to mount a really great, robust immune response. And we need it for proper detoxification. So I love to teach parents how to use other modalities safely, like essential oils, like homeopathics, like herbs, like detox baths, or whatever kind of lifestyle practices we can do to support that child through the illness naturally, without kind of loading on more chemicals for their bodies to process, but also, if they have to use it, doing it without any associated guilt. Because I think that's another big thing. A lot of the natural health space gets so caught up in, I will not do this, that it's adding this layer of stress that we don't need, because what I've often found is when my children need paracetamol, actually need it, it works a lot better because they get it so infrequently. So let's be grateful for modern medicine, but let's use it as our second line, when
Yeah, I couldn't
absolutely
agree more. Very well said. Sometimes you just need the medication, but when you
Yeah,
don't need it, don't have it. I agree.
yeah,
I have another question, and this is very big topic. I probably we could do another 2 podcasts about it, but I just want to quickly touch on mold. So I live
yeah.
along on a coastline where lots of people have a lot
Mm,
of issues with mold in their
yes.
houses. I'd like to just summarize what mold does in our bodies. Where can we find the mold, and how can we prevent having too
Yeah,
much mold in our environment, even if we
yeah,
live in a humid environment?
that's it. Yeah, so mold's a big one, and especially for your followers, who a lot of them will be in Australia. So health effects of mold exposure, there can be a lot, and it's one of those things where if you are finding that you are having these chronic symptoms and you've eliminated everything else, definitely don't forget to have a think about mold as being a potential cause of a lot of these things. So a lot of these symptoms sound quite common, and they could be a lot of other things as well, but things like allergic symptoms, so your watery eyes, your runny nose, sneezing, itching, coughing, even wheezing, like difficulty breathing, headaches, migraines, fatigue, even just fatigue, and if you have, so repeated exposure to mold can actually increase a person's sensitivity to it. so causing more allergic reactions. For some people that have asthma, inhaling mold spores can bring on asthmatic attacks. And other signs of mold toxicity. So if you've had mold and now it's at really high levels, you may be experiencing things like a persistent cough, even repeated sinus infections. That's a big one that I hear a lot about. Random skin rashes. We've already talked about headaches, but even migraines, dizziness, vertigo, brain fog, memory loss. Like, there's such a range of symptoms, and every single person is going to be affected differently because we are all bio-individual. And so you can't just say necessarily this is the one thing, because it's quite a range depending on how you're personally going to be affected. So my advice around mold is to find the mold. Often, obviously, bathrooms are a big one, under sinks. But if you have any kind of floods, so I know Australia got hit hard, well, probably in the last 2 years actually, with a lot of flooding. And so did New Zealand. We got massive cyclone last March, and the whole of our downstairs area just got completely flooded. And so we had to remediate. And when I say remediate, I would get a professional in. If you've found the mold, get it treated properly, and then do everything you can to avoid mold growing in your home to begin with. So in really high humidity areas, like a lot of Australia, like where you live, highly recommend putting a dehumidifier on your list to prioritize. Now, you might also look at maybe investing in a humidity meter. They're pretty cheap. I think you can get them from most hardware stores, so that you actually know when to turn your humidifier on, right? So mold actually needs 55% humidity or higher in order to grow. So just keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to a dehumidifier, I have a discount code for your audience as well on one that I recommend, which I think will be really helpful, because there's a lot out there, and they'll all do the job. But it's definitely, if you're living in an area that you know is high humidity, this is kind of a bit of a non-negotiable, because it really is, by the time you're seeing condensation on your windows, it's a little bit late, so that would be my advice. I also have a beautiful mold prevention spray that I love to make. So that is basically just water, a little bit of clove essential oil, and some tea tree essential oil. Now, those are both highly antifungal. So what I do is I actually spray my windowsills and I wipe it away so that those essential oils are still on the actual sill itself. There's no moisture, but what happens is when if that mold spore decides to land there, then it's not going to be able to grow. So that's a great way to kind of mitigate mold in your home. You might want to use it not just on windowsills, but like in the rubber seal of your front loader washing machine, or in the shower, wherever you're finding that mold's growing. So that's another little hack I've got for you.
Great, lots of good hacks. Okay, one last topic, which is also huge, but I just feel like we need to mention and make people aware of electromagnetic frequencies.
Yeah. So this is another biggie, as you've said. It's definitely one that I like people to focus on a little bit later in their low-tox journeys, after addressing, your water, your cleaning products, your cookware, those kinds of things. But it is important to talk about. So there's some studies that have found a link between EMF exposure and higher risk of childhood leukemias. And there's also some preliminary evidence around dangers existing from long-term use, specifically to our nervous system. So our brain, cognitive function, all of that. So my advice is very much around avoiding and kind of mitigating that risk, rather than, keeping on doing all the things and just chucking a sticker on your phone or your laptop and thinking that you're protected, because those kinds of things are a real false sense of security. So what you want to be doing is looking at ways that you can kind of lower your daily EMF exposure. And this is a really big one for our men as well, who often get forgotten in this conversation. There was some new research that just came out showing that EMF from phones actually affect sperm quality and motility in our guys. So this is from carrying phones in pockets. So definitely don't be carrying your phone on your person. And I would also advise charging your phone away from your bedside table, right? So if you can, on the other side of the room, better yet, not even in the room at all, but definitely not next to your head. And that's kind of a double win. Like, A, you're not getting the EMFs, but also like you have to get out of bed to turn off your alarm, right? So it's going to be better for your morning routines. So that's an easy thing that people can implement. I also recommend turning off your Wi-Fi at night. And if you've got a baby and you're using like a baby monitor, make sure the monitor is away from the cot as far as possible. Making sure that your beds and your children's beds particularly are not up against the wall of another big device. So, like a fridge or actually like an electronic meter. We don't want them sleeping up against those. So kind of being mindful about technology use with our kids as well. So if they have, their tablet and they're using their tablet, don't let them lay it on their laps. If you can, get them to be on their tummies with it in front of them, so kind of away from their bodies. This is also really good, a lot better for their posture instead of having their neck kind of tilted down, looking at their laptop or their phone. So that's something else you can do. I actually really like to use radiation-free earphones. So these are basically tubes, and this just, instead of using AirPods, I also have a manual step tracker. You might be looking at this ancient watch that I have on my, instead of a smart watch. But do you know what? Like, you don't have to be perfect. Like, we have a Wi-Fi speaker system in my home that my husband is obsessed with, and he will never let that go. So do you know what I mean? It's about balance. It's doing what you can to be conscious, but not being obsessive, because we live in a world of technology and we literally can't do everything, right? So do what feels doable for you in the stage of life that you're at, and be okay with the rest.
100% agree. Just pick your vices and fix the rest. That's what 100%. I do.
Yep.
And this was so much good information. I knew when I invited you on a podcast that it was going to be amazing. But for someone who's never heard about this, and there are people like that out there, this is very overwhelming. Yep. So for those who never implemented any of these strategies, don't know anything about it, what are the top 3 things that they should or could start with?
Yeah, awesome. I would say water. So, grab like a jug, water filter, start there. Easy swap to make. Fragrance is a big one. So just start being conscious about, it might be as simple as buying the unscented version of whatever else you're buying. And this covers the one thing of avoiding fragrance. So that covers personal care, laundry, air fresheners that you might be spraying in your home. So the quality of your air is going to improve. It might be ditching your Glade plugins and buying a diffuser and an essential oil. Like whatever it is for you, but lowering that fragrance in your home. And the third one would be plastic. So we've already covered everything around plastic, but just starting to bring your mind and your awareness to how much plastic you're using in your home, so from your takeaway containers to your plastic pump bottles, just make those investments as you can financially to start trying to lessen the plastic exposure in your home.
Great, it's totally doable. So just to recap, water, fragrance, and plastic. Great. So now I have last 2 questions that are no Low-tox Live related. They can be, but they usually not. What is your favorite book? And I always ask this for my own sake because I love reading. So I get here my book tips. And the second question, if you could only give one health and fitness advice or wellness advice to our listeners, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a huge one. My favorite book overall is the Bible. I read it every day. But my favorite kind of health and wellness book that I've read recently is one by Dr. Eliza Song, who is an integrative pediatrician, and that's obviously my area of passion. And it's called Happy Kids, Healthy Kids. So go and download that from Audible. Brilliant listen. So it's really amazing. She's really big on gut health with kids, and she goes into in depth, links
of gut health to ADHD and autism and like chronic disease basically. So it's teaching you how to nourish your little one's gut. But she has a whole natural first aid kit that she teaches you how to use as well. So brilliant read for your listeners. What else? Oh, health advice. Okay.
Health advice.
Yeah. I guess for me, I come from a background of quite, I don't know, like disordered eating and kind of obsessive, like over exercise. So like I've been on a real journey to get to the point of, fueling my body for nourishment and not deprivation, and those kinds of things. So I guess, my advice for your listeners around, health, fitness, but also this low-tox journey is progress over perfect. Don't get overwhelmed by like the number of toxic things and end up really fearful and like in paralysis and not do anything, because I think some people just end up that way because there's a lot of reels on social media that really are quite alarmist, and they cause people to be like, oh my gosh, everything's toxic, what, like I may as well not do anything, I'm gonna die anyway, and that's like not the right attitude, right? So getting to a place where you can make these kind of steps sustainably, and not get caught up in comparison, because I think that's another big thing. Like, don't compare your step 1 of your journey to somebody else's step 20 or step 40. I've been doing this for 7 years. Start small where you can, where it fits into your budget, and make swaps as you run out of things, is a really great way to kind of keep in mind when you're trying to adopt some of these lifestyle practices.
That's excellent advice. Thank you so much for all that. I really loved it, and I would love to have you back in the future to maybe talk about some of the other topics a little bit more in detail, because you have so much to share, so many good practical tips. Thank you again. And
thank you so much for having me.
See you. Have a nice day. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to hear more from Chief, please like and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Comment below to let us know what topics interest you, and you can find us on wearechief.com.